Hello, my name is Matthew, and Steve Donahue and I have been reading the Odyssey by Homer in the month of August. And this past week we read the last six books, the end of this fantastic poem. And the Odyssey has one of the most magnificent climaxes and conclusions of any story. It's incredible and so satisfying. This story begins with a family's setting. We have Penelope and Telemachus in Ithaca, just wondering where their father is, where Penelope's husband is. He's been at war. He's been in Troy for 10 years, and then another 10 years have passed where everyone else has been making their arrivals. They've been coming home, and all this time is going by, and there's a restlessness in Odysseus's household. Suitors are accumulating, straggling around and loitering, and moving themselves in, making themselves at home. And Penelope, clever in her own right, comes up with a strategy that she's going to weave this. She's going to work on her loom and make this big blanket, and then unravel it each night. And that only holds out for so long. Telemachus goes off in search of his father. The suitors are becoming more emboldened. Then we have this adventure tale where Odysseus tells his story of his trials and tribulations on his way home. And those are all of the fantastical, notable stories that everybody thinks about with the Odyssey. And at the halfway point, Odysseus makes his way home. And the idea of being off at war and coming home to find your house overrun by these men that want to take your livelihood and sleep with your wife. The kind of betrayal that must go through your mind. And Odysseus's reaction is just perfect. It's the initial visceral reaction that a typical person would quickly start registering as an overreaction. But his thought is, I'll slaughter them. I'm going to slaughter every single one of them. And there's the famous, one of the best scenes, the slaughter in the hall. But Odysseus is this, through the disguise of Athena, he has the appearance of an old beggar man. And him and the swineherd and Telemachus are making their way through the house, doing a sort of investigation. They're just getting a lay of the land. Who's in here? How are they acting? How despicable are these people? How many? And who's going to be on my side? Odysseus is thinking, like, who can I trust? Who has been loyal and who has been disloyal? He has an encounter with his wife, Penelope. And, of course, Odysseus lies. Every time he opens his mouth, he's lying. But he tells her a story that in his travels as this beggar, he's had an encounter with Odysseus, and he assures Penelope, who's at the end of her tether. She's just completely at a loss, distraught, without hope. The household is crumbling. these suitors are going to bankrupt um, their small kingdom if something drastic doesn't happen immediately. And Odysseus, as the beggar, assures her that her husband is coming home. And even that is, the response to that statement is still taken with woe. She can't believe it. It's been too long. 20 years have gone by. One of the most heartbreaking moments in her life was the day that he left. This is 2 decades after that point. We get a moment where Odysseus is being worked on by the nursing servant, and she recognizes that this old beggar has a scar on his foot from a childhood injury. A hog or a boar gored his foot, and so he has this distinct scar that could only be Odysseus. Odysseus has to clasp this woman's mouth shut and say, like, "Do you want to get me killed?" And so slowly there's people that are finding out. Odysseus, as the beggar, talks to the swineherd, reveals himself, and Penelope now has a call to action. She is going to ask, she's going to throw down the gauntlet. She's going to say to all of these suitors, "Here is my husband's great bow," and it's a bow and arrow that you shoot things with. And she says, if you can string the bow that was the great Odysseus, I'll relent. Whoever can do this, I'll be their bride. And the scene of the slaughter is, at least at first, extremely satisfying and brilliantly done. This fantastical, extreme, unbelievable and unlikely situation is created, pulled off brilliantly, and you're rooting for Odysseus. For all of the things that are going on in this story, you have to be behind him, and you are completely when the slaughter begins. But for as great as that is, I love the moment with the bow. I just think it's so brilliant, and it's unnecessary. It's a short segment before the big climax that didn't need to be in the dramatic story arc at all. They're going to line up these axes that have holes in the handles, and the suitor has to attempt to string the bow, and then with a bow and arrow, shoot an arrow through the holes of a whole line of axes. That's the contest. And it could just as well have been Odysseus going around with Telemachus, clearing out all of the weapons, locking the doors, and having the big slaughter. And instead, it's genius. Right before that, the suitors are emasculated, and it's by an inanimate object. They can't do it. Here's this bow that everybody knows the great, powerful, broad-shouldered Odysseus could string with ease. And we have suitor after suitor wrestling and struggling with this bow. They can't... And if you win, if you string it up, you get all of the glory. You get this kingdom. Everybody agrees that you'll be able to marry Penelope. And against their own interests, the suitors in the room are just going mad with their reactions. They're either insulting each other and hurling abuses about like how weak you are, I can't believe you can't do it, rooting them on. Whereas if they did, everyone else in the room would lose. But they're just, it might as well be a pickle jar. The way that they are handing off this bow, everybody's going at this thing and they can't do it. It's so emasculating. Before Odysseus even shows up, everyone in the hall has been taken down several pegs. They're supposed to be these youthful, hale and hearty men in the prime of their lives. And they can't string a simple bow. I love it. I love it. And then we have the big reveal, and then the climax. The beggar picks up the bow. There's a back and forth, but eventually he picks up the bow and he strings it with ease. And there's only one man that can do that, the great Odysseus. And then we get just one of the most brutal, savage episodes. It can go toe-to-toe with any portion of the Iliad as far as savagery. And what makes it, in some ways, what makes it more satisfying than many of the episodes in the Iliad, at least for me, is I have a vested interest, and I know who these people are. I might not know each individual suitor, but there's a personal reason why I have feelings towards all of these characters in an intimate way, with Odysseus and the loyal swineherd, and Telemachus, who's a young man but not quite an adult. Penelope, a wife missing her husband at war. All the servants throughout the household. It's relatable compared to the Iliad, which is also astounding. There's still a namelessness to all of the fallen soldiers, all of the warriors that die on the battlefield, even though they are explicitly named. Here's a very personal fight sequence. It's great. I'm going to read a little bit. Let's see. So, Odysseus has announced himself, and he's made himself perfectly clear about what's about to happen. Let's see. Groping, frantic, each one persuading himself the guest had killed the man by chance. That was Antonius. Shot an arrow straight through his throat. Poor fools, blind to the fact that all their necks were in the noose, their doom sealed. With a dark look, the wily fighter Odysseus shouted back, "You dogs, you never imagined I'd return from Troy, so cocksure that you bled my house to death, ravished my serving women, wooed my wife behind my back while I was still alive. No fear of the gods who rule the skies up there, no fear that men's revenge might arrive someday. Now all your necks are in the noose, your doom is sealed." Terror gripped them all, blanched their faces white. And it's a bloodbath described in horrific detail. Swords going straight through torso. Someone gets stabbed in the back, the sword comes out of the front cavity of the chest, or being gored through the genitals, and having heads lopped off and limbs lopped off, and they're in a confined space. So these bodies are just falling, and there's pools of blood. You'd need mops and buckets, and thinking about like the sprays and splatters and all of the gore and filth that would be covering Odysseus. And as these men are going down, and Telemachus is there too, the amount of sheer terror, fear, anytime you have that big kind of fight sequence, and there's going to be the last couple people that know they stand no chance, and are going to start showing either cowardice or strategy. And how am I going to get out of this? I'm locked in a hall with a lion, and people are pleading for their lives, and Odysseus is slaughtering them. There's a few people. Telemachus steps in to say that the lyre player is all right. We can leave him. And it does turn. It's an extremely satisfying, fun, big sequence. But then there were servant women who, at least in the mind of Odysseus and the other people in the household, there were these servant women who were also disloyal. And he calls them in. These women are screaming and falling on the floor, horrified at this monstrous scene. Just 24, however many men chopped into pieces, laying in just a lake of blood and gore and filth. He calls them in and has them clean up the room, collect all of the bodies, wipe down the furniture, scrub off the walls, get all of the spots off the ceiling. And they go in and they clean the hall, take all of the bodies out, and then all of the disloyal serving women are promptly slaughtered outside. It's the same. It reminds me of the scene of the mobsters that drive out into the desert. Some poor sap hands them a shovel and says, "Start digging." They go in and have to do this, and it turns your stomach. It's still pretty satisfying, but that's brutal. And finally, we have Odysseus revealing himself to his wife Penelope. Somehow, Penelope's upstairs in her room, just sobbing. And maybe she was sobbing so loudly she didn't hear the horrific screams from the dozens of men that were dying, swords and spears, just in the other room of the house. She didn't hear any of that. But a servant woman comes up, tells her what happened. Everybody's dead. Odysseus is back. And she goes, "Don't play games with me. Like, I'm already mad with grief." And servant woman goes, No. All that's true." And Odysseus and Penelope meet. There are moments throughout Odysseus's arrival with people in disbelief, just not believing their eyes. Part of that is some intervention with the gods, Athena changing somebody's appearance, but just the time. 20 years have gone by. But Odysseus came home, took his revenge, and retook his kingdom. And there's a satisfying ending of the poem. The bow, this inanimate object, I just think is brilliant. It's one of my favorite. By the second half of the book, it's just a series of my favorite moments. I should say, I keep saying that Odysseus lies about everything, and I said all of the tales of his wild seafaring journeys were all lies. And I was reading this, and there's a moment where it's like the night before the big slaughter, and Odysseus, as the old beggar, is restless, can't go to sleep at night, and we have him just in his own thoughts, and he recollects the moment that he had with the Cyclops. And I was reading that and thinking, like, well, I think that kind of shoots my theory if, in his own ruminations, he's recalling at least one episode of his fantastical tales. If he wasn't lying, he was certainly exaggerating, putting himself in a better light. I love it. I'm so satisfied. I can't wait to hear what Steve has to say. I know it's one of his favorite books, and there's so many great moments. Another great book club book. So Steve and I read the Odyssey by Homer, translated by Robert Fagles, and it's fantastic. So if you've been reading along, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about anything I had to say. I'll be looking forward to hearing Steve's thoughts on the last 6 books. So please leave a comment if you would like, and thank you for watching, and take care.